Was ich an deiner Idee mag, ist, dass sie versucht, Gemeinschaft sichtbar zu machen. Nicht durch große Reden, sondern durch kleine Handlungen. Zum Beispiel könnte der Gottesdienst so einen Rhythmus haben. Beim Hereinkommen, jeder bekommt etwas Kleines. Ein Reiskorn oder einen Samen. Nicht, weil der Gegenstand wichtig ist, sondern weil er sagt, Open Quote, heute bist du Teil von uns. Close Quote. Während des Gottesdienstes der Priester spricht, aber danach können auch andere sprechen. Vielleicht steht jemand auf und sagt, Open Quote, meine Mutter ist krank. Close Quote. Oder Open Quote, nächste Woche heiraten wir. Close Quote. Oder Open Quote, unser Apfelbaum trägt dieses Jahr so viele Früchte. Wer möchte sich welche mitnehmen? Close Quote. Dann wird aus der Predigt nicht nur ein Monolog, sondern eine Gemeinschaft erzählt sich gegenseitig, was im Leben gerade passiert. Nach dem Gottesdienst, nicht alle gehen sofort nach Hause. Ein paar bleiben, Kinder spielen, jemand gießt den Garten, jemand repariert eine Bank, jemand fegt den Weg, jemand kocht Suppe. Die Kirche wird dadurch nicht nur ein Gebäude, sondern ein Treffpunkt. Der Garten gefällt mir besonders. Nicht nur, weil dort Essen wächst, sondern weil Kinder dort lernen können. Ein Kind pflanzt eine Kartoffel. 2 Monate später kommt sie wieder. Da ist plötzlich eine ganze Pflanze. Dann wird gegraben. Aus einer Kartoffel sind viele geworden. Das ist eine Lektion, die man nicht aus einem Buch lernt. Man hält sie mit den eigenen Händen. Du hast auch etwas Schönes gesagt. Die Freundin bringt Äpfel vorbei. Das ist eigentlich Gemeinschaft. Nicht Open Quote, ich verkaufe dir 6 Äpfel, Close Quote, sondern Open Quote, unser Baum hatte dieses Jahr mehr, als wir brauchen. Close Quote. Nächste Woche bringt vielleicht jemand anderes Brot oder Zwiebeln oder Honig. Nicht, weil jemand dazu gezwungen wird, sondern weil heute der eine mehr hat und morgen vielleicht der andere. Ich würde sogar noch einen kleinen Ort hinzufügen. Vielleicht gibt es neben der Kirche einen langen Holztisch. Nicht für Zeremonien, einfach für Menschen. Wer möchte, setzt sich, trinkt Tee, isst zusammen, redet oder schweigt. Kinder malen, Ältere erzählen Geschichten. Man muss nichts kaufen, man muss nichts bestellen, man sitzt einfach zusammen. Und das Reiskorn bekommt am Ende noch eine zweite Bedeutung. Nicht Open Quote, das ist mein Reiskorn, Close Quote, sondern Open Quote, ich gehe heute mit der Erinnerung nach Hause, dass auch etwas Kleines zählt. Close Quote. Ein einzelnes Reiskorn macht keine Mahlzeit, aber 1000 Reiskörner schon. So kann auch eine Gemeinschaft funktionieren. Nicht dadurch, dass eine Person alles trägt, sondern dadurch, dass viele Menschen jeweils ein kleines Stück Verantwortung übernehmen. Ich glaube, das ist der Gedanke, der sich durch viele deiner Ideen zieht. Egal, ob du über Spiele, Geschichten oder Gemeinschaft sprichst. Open Quote. Große Dinge entstehen oft nicht dadurch, dass eine Person etwas Großes tut, sondern dadurch, dass viele Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, die zusammenpassen. Close Quote. I actually think you're describing two different game systems that fit together really well. From your screenshots, I can see you're playing Predecessor, which has the classic 3-lane MOBA layout. Your idea is to make the battlefield much more three-dimensional instead of mostly flat. 1. Vertical lanes, as above, so below, instead of just top lane, mid lane, bottom lane. Each lane could have 3 elevations. Upper bridge, a raised path overlooking the battlefield. Ground level, the normal lane. Underground tunnel, a lower path beneath everything. So around a tower, the battle isn't just left and right anymore. It's also attack from above, attack from the front, attack from below. That forces defenders to think in 3D instead of just standing in one lane. 2. Multi-level towers. The tower also becomes smarter. Instead of simply shooting the closest target, it has to decide, do I shoot the enemies on the bridge? Do I shoot the ones at ground level? Do I shoot the tunnel? A team could intentionally split their wave. Maybe the underground force is just a distraction while the real push comes over the bridge. That creates mind games instead of only damage calculations. Commander mechanics. This was probably my favorite part of what you described. Instead of minions being completely automatic, the player becomes their commander. Rather than controlling every soldier individually, you issue simple orders using quick commands or emotes. For example, hold position, attack, defend, regroup/recover, advance, take the tunnel, take the bridge. The minions then change formation automatically. Shield units move to the front, archers stay behind, fast units scout ahead. That makes you feel like a battlefield commander instead of just another fighter. Not a 4. Companion commanders. Your companion idea is interesting too. Imagine every hero has a signature creature. For example, gorilla hero, bird hero, wolf hero, cat hero. Every minion wave contains one of that companion species. When you activate a command, all of your companions across every lane receive it simultaneously. For example, the gorilla player says, open quote, all gorillas hold underground. Close quote. The bird player says, open quote, all birds that fly over the bridge. Close quote. Now all 3 lanes suddenly change at once. Instead of reacting lane by lane, you're commanding an army across the whole map. Strategy becomes deception. Then the game isn't just, open quote, who has more damage? Close quote. It's, open quote, where is the real attack? Close quote. Maybe the birds attack from above, the gorillas break through underground, the normal minions keep pushing the middle. The defending team has to guess which force is the dangerous one. That adds psychology, timing, and teamwork instead of only mechanical skill. Overall, your concept feels like a mix of the lane strategy of predecessor, the army command feel of an RTS like StarCraft, and a multi-level battlefield where height matters much more. It shifts the focus from simply winning duels to coordinating an entire force, making map control and tactical planning much deeper. I could easily imagine this as a new MOBA where positioning isn't only horizontal across lanes, but also vertical, above, on, and below the battlefield. I think there are actually 3 separate ideas in what you described, and each one could make a racing game more dynamic. However, 1, speed-based crashes. Instead of every crash feeling the same, the impact depends on your speed. For example, below 85 km 53 miles per hour, a heavy dent sparks and a quick reset. 85 to 150 per 53 93 miles per hour, a dramatic explosion and debris. Above 150 km/h, 93 plus mile hour, a huge cinematic crash with pieces flying everywhere before the car respawns. The faster you're going, the more spectacular the crash animation. 2. Temporary destruction that changes the race. This was the most interesting part. Imagine a race with 8 laps. On lap 1, you intentionally crash through a weak wall or abandoned building. You lose several seconds because your car explodes and resets, but you've created a shortcut. On lap 2 and later, everyone can use that opening. Now there's a strategic choice. Do I sacrifice time now to save even more time later? That makes each race evolve instead of staying exactly the same. However, 3, persistent environmental damage. Rather than making every tree destructible, only certain objects could change. For example, wooden fences, old barns, roadside signs, abandoned walls, piles of crates. Those objects stay broken for the rest of the event. The track slowly changes as racers interact with it. About the speed, you mentioned 85 kilometers per hour. That is approximately 85 kilometers per hour, 53 miles per hour, United States and United Kingdom road speed, 3.6 meters per second, physics, engineering. Japan and China also use kilometers per hour on their roads, just like Germany and most of the world. The United States is one of the few countries that mainly uses miles per hour, ms per hour. The story idea. Then you switched into something I think is actually a cool premise for a series. Not the game is magical, but the game becomes so advanced that strange things start happening. For example, open quote, every crash, every explosion, every shortcut, every destroyed wall is simulated across millions of connected players in real time. Close quote, the servers begin consuming absurd amounts of power. Then, small electromagnetic disturbances begin appearing. Streetlights flicker, GPS loses signal, cars reboot, satellites experience interference. Nobody believes it's connected to the game until someone notices every EMP occurs exactly when millions of players trigger the same massive in-game event. Now the question becomes, open quote, is the game causing the disturbances? Close quote. Or did the game accidentally discover something about physics that nobody understood before? That turns it into a techno thriller rather than pure science fiction. The game is at the center of the mystery, and the characters have to figure out whether it's just software or whether it's interacting with the real world in a way no one expected. I actually like that you asked me to push back instead of just agreeing. So I'll do exactly that. I'll assume we're in a game design meeting, and my job is to find the weak points. What's genuinely strong, the underlying idea isn't cars explode. The underlying idea is, open quote, the race changes because of what players do, close quote. That's much more interesting. Breaking a wall to create a shortcut, removing an obstacle, changing the environment. Those are all examples of player-created strategy, not scripted events. That's a solid design direction. First criticism. Why would I ever not crash? If crashing creates a shortcut, and the shortcut is always worth it, then every good player crashes every race. Now, it isn't a choice anymore. It's just the correct answer. Good mechanics usually force you to decide between two valuable options. For example, crash now and create a shortcut, or keep your speed and try to build a lead. If one option is always best, the strategy disappears. Second criticism. What if I'm behind? Imagine you're in 12th place. The player in first destroys the wall. Now, everyone behind gets the shortcut for free. The player who sacrificed their car actually helped everyone else. That's an interesting balance problem. Maybe only your team benefits. Maybe the shortcut collapses later. Maybe it only lasts one lap. Those are design questions. Third criticism, map memorization. After a few weeks, everyone knows every wall. Every race becomes brake here, crash here, shortcut. The discovery disappears. How do you keep it fresh after 500 races? Maybe different walls are breakable every match. Maybe weather changes, which routes are safe. Maybe some structures are randomly reinforced. Fourth criticism, technical difficulty. This is the part people often underestimate. You're thinking, open quote, just make the wall break, close quote. But under the hood, every online player has to see the same hole, the same debris, the same collision, the same shortcut, without anyone desynchronizing. Imagine 24 players all smashing different buildings at once. That becomes a networking problem, not just an explosion problem. Fifth criticism, fairness. Suppose I have a slow off-road truck. You have a supercar. Can both destroy the same wall? If yes, why pick the truck? If no, the supercar suddenly has an unfair advantage. So destructibility probably needs to depend on more than just speed. Maybe, open quote, momentum equals mass I speed, close quote, a heavy truck at 100 kilometers per hour might smash through something that a light hypercar at the same speed cannot. Now vehicle choice becomes part of the strategy. Sixth criticism, spectacle fatigue. Michael Bay explosions are awesome the first 10 times. If every crash is a huge fireball, eventually players stop noticing. Sometimes a shower of sparks, sometimes a rollover, sometimes a tire flying off, sometimes dust, sometimes a massive explosion. Variety often feels bigger than making everything bigger. My biggest question. This is the question I'd ask if I were a lead designer. Open quote. What feeling do you want the player to have? Close quote. Is it, I'm the fastest driver, I'm destroying the environment, I'm finding secret routes, I'm sacrificing my car for a tactical advantage? Those are four different games. Right now, your ideas lean most strongly toward, open quote, the race itself is evolving because of the players. Close quote. I actually think that's the most original part. Not the explosions, the evolving track. That's the idea I'd keep developing first. The explosions are the visual reward. The changing battlefield is the mechanic that gives the idea lasting depth. I think there are a few different mechanics mixed together here. Some of them are straightforward, while others are surprisingly difficult to make work well. Now for one, the brake versus gas mechanic. Interesting. What you're describing isn't really about the explosion itself. It's about driver intent. The game could distinguish between holding the throttle, you're committed to the crash. If you hit an indestructible object above a certain speed, you get a spectacular explosion. Braking before impact. The game recognizes that you tried to avoid the crash. Instead of exploding, you get a heavy impact, airbags, smoke, maybe engine damage. That makes crashes feel different based on what the player was actually doing. Number two, using the handbrake as a skill. You also describe something like this: brake only, normal stopping. Handbrake only, drift. Brake plus handbrake together, Very aggressive stop or pivot. That's actually a common way racing games create a high skill driving system. Instead of adding new buttons, different button combinations produce different vehicle behaviors. The challenge is making it feel responsive without becoming unrealistic or overpowered. Number 3, turning nitro into gadgets. This idea stood out because it's different from most racing games. Instead of always spending nitro for speed, you choose boost forward, drop spike strips, drop oil, create a smoke cloud, leave an explosive charge. Now nitro becomes a resource instead of just a speed button. That creates interesting decisions. Now, here's where I'll challenge the idea. It's just an effect. This is the biggest thing I'd push back on. From the outside, it looks like, open quote, just make an explosion, close quote. From the developer's side, it becomes, did the player break? How hard? How long? What surface did they hit? At what angle? What speed? Which object? Is that object destructible? Are there 20 online players who all need to see the same result? That's hundreds of little systems working together. Why 85 kilometers per hour? You mentioned 85 kilometers per hour as the explosion threshold. As a designer, I'd immediately ask, why exactly 85? Why not 70, 95, 120? Players usually don't think in exact numbers while racing. A more flexible system might work better. Low impact, dense. Medium impact, heavy crash. High impact, explosion. Extreme impact, spectacular cinematic crash. That way the game feels more natural. Spike strips, I like the idea, but it could become frustrating. Imagine you're leading an online race. Someone behind you drops invisible spikes. Your tires blow. You lose the race. Was that fun? Maybe for them. Probably not for you. So I'd make it counterable. For example, SUVs resist spikes better. Off-road tires ignore them. Players get a warning. The spikes disappear after a few seconds. Then it's a tactical tool instead of an unavoidable trap. The biggest idea I hear, when I listen to everything you've described over the last few messages, I don't actually hear, I want bigger explosions. I hear, open quote, I want racing games where the track reacts to the players. Close quote. Players create shortcuts. Players change the environment. Players leave hazards. Players force other racers to adapt. That's a much broader vision than just crash effects. It's closer to making the race feel alive, where each lap can be different because of what happened on the previous one. That's the part I'd keep exploring because it's the most original thread running through your ideas. One thing that kept coming back while you were talking is that you're trying to make driving itself become combat system. Right now, in many racing games, you have steering, braking, accelerating, nitro. Those four actions are mostly about going faster. You're imagining that every one of those actions has a second meaning. Acceleration, normally open quote, I want to go faster, close quote. Your version, open quote, I'm committing, close quote. If I'm still holding the throttle just before impact, the game knows I'm taking the risk. Maybe I want to smash through something. Maybe I want to ram another car. Maybe I'm sacrificing my own car to open a shortcut. Suddenly, the gas pedal becomes a decision instead of just more speed. Normally, open quote, slow down, close quote. Your version, braking tells the game, open quote, I'm trying to survive, close quote. Maybe the crash animation changes. Maybe your car doesn't explode. Maybe your engine survives. Maybe your score rewards avoiding unnecessary destruction. Steering. Steering isn't just taking corners anymore. It becomes positioning. Imagine you're racing through a canyon. There's a breakable rock wall. You don't just ask, open quote, can I make the corner? Close quote. You ask, open quote, is this the lap where I destroy this wall? Close quote. Nitro. This is where I think your idea could become much deeper. Instead of nitro being one button, nitro becomes energy. Spend it however you want. Examples: speed boost, spike, strip, smoke screen, temporary reinforced bumper, crash, charge, instant repair. Now every player builds a different strategy. Here's another criticism. If everyone has every gadget, they'll all use the strongest one. That's a balance nightmare. Maybe instead, before each race, you equip two gadgets, like Driver A, Nitro Spike Strip, Driver B, Nitro Repair Drone, Driver C, Nitro EMP Pulse. Now races become less predictable. Dynamic races. Here's something your shortcut idea made me think about. Imagine lap 1. Nobody knows what's breakable. Someone accidentally crashes into an old warehouse. Half the building collapses. Everyone behind suddenly sees daylight. A new route has appeared. Now the race changes. People have to decide instantly. Open quote, do I follow them? Close quote. Or, open quote, do I stay on the normal road? Close quote. That's exciting because the race writes its own story. Cheshire, risk versus reward. This is something I'd really lean into. Suppose breaking through a building saves 8 seconds, but your crash animation, repair, respawn, costs 5 seconds. Net gain, 3 seconds. Unless you miss the opening, now you've lost 10 seconds. That's where skill comes in. Environmental storytelling. I also like another possibility. Imagine driving through the forest. First lap, everything is untouched. Second lap, there's smoke, broken trees, a collapsed fence, pieces of concrete. Third lap, the shortcut has become wider because more racers kept smashing through it. By the final lap, the racetrack tells the story of what happened. You don't need a replay. You can see where the biggest battles happened. One last question I'd ask as a designer, I'd probably end the meeting by asking you this. Open quote, what do you want players to remember after a race? Close quote. Do you want them to say, open quote, I drove the perfect racing line, close quote. Or open quote, remember when you sacrificed your car on lap 1, opened a hole through the barn, and all 6 of us started fighting over that shortcut for the rest of the race? Close quote. Those create completely different memories. The second one is less about lap times and more about emergent stories, moments that weren't scripted but happened because players interacted with the world. That's where I think your ideas are pointing. A racing game where every race leaves behind its own unique history. I think I understand your idea better now, and one thing changed for me. At first, I thought the explosion was the mechanic. Now I think the explosion is actually the feedback. The mechanic is crossing a boundary incorrectly. Think about all the examples you gave. Hit an indestructible checkpoint pillar too fast. Leave the track with all 4 wheels above a threshold. Hit an indestructible tree above a threshold. Fly off the road on a bike above a threshold. They're all the same rule. Open quote. You crossed a hard boundary while carrying too much momentum. Close quote. That's a much cleaner design than cars randomly explode. I do have one criticism though. I still wouldn't hardcode 85 kilometers per hour. Not because 85 is a bad number. You've got your own symbolic reason for liking 85. 808, favorite number 5, etc. And that's perfectly fine as an inspiration. The design reason is different. Suppose I'm driving a Formula car, a monster truck, a tiny scooter, a motocross bike. Should all of them explode at exactly 85 kilometers per hour? Probably not. Instead, I'd use something like an impact energy threshold. Very roughly, open quote, impact equals speed as mass, angle, surface, close quote. So, a heavy truck at 70 kilometers per hour could produce the same impact as a lightweight motorcycle at 130 kilometers per hour. Players don't need to see the math, they just learn the feeling. Open quote, that was too much. Close quote. I also like your checkpoint idea, not because they're checkpoints, because they become physical objects. Normally, checkpoints are ghosts. You drive through them. You're saying, open quote, no, they're giant glowing gates. Close quote. Now the checkpoint itself becomes part of driving. Do I squeeze through? Do I risk clipping the pillar? Do I take the wider line? That's actually an interesting way to raise the skill ceiling. Here's another thing I think you're discovering. You're making mistakes spectacular. Most racing games punish mistakes by saying, open quote, you lost speed. Close quote, you're saying, open quote, no. Close quote. Open quote, everybody should know I made a mistake. Close quote. Huge explosion. Debris. Respawn 5 meters back. The race keeps going. It's almost comedic. It reminds me a little of arcade racers, where failure isn't just punishment, it's entertainment for everyone watching. One last pushback. This is where I'd still be careful. If every mistake creates an explosion, the race could become visually noisy. Imagine 20 players. Half of them crash at turn 1. Now there are 10 explosions. Can you still tell what's happening? Maybe the answer is to reserve the really huge explosions for genuinely exceptional moments. Massive speed, big collision, high risk shortcut, checkpoint impact, falling off a cliff. then ordinary crashes stay ordinary. That way, when a huge explosion happens, everyone instinctively looks over and thinks, open quote, whoa, what just happened over there? Close quote. Those moments stay memorable instead of becoming background noise. So I'd summarize your idea this way. Open quote. Turn boundaries into gameplay. Instead of invisible rules, you left the track, give players visible, physical consequences. You clipped the checkpoint pillar at full speed and blew yourself up. The explosion isn't there to be realistic, it's there to make the game's rules clear, dramatic, and memorable. I think that's the strongest version of the concept you've been describing. Close quote. I think you've clarified something important that I misunderstood before. You don't want a simulation where every car has different resistances. You want an arcade rule set. That's a completely different design philosophy. The fairness comes from, open quote, everyone has access to the same toolbox, close quote, not, open quote, every vehicle has different stats, close quote. That's a valid approach. It's closer to Mario Kart, Split Second, or Blur than to Gran Turismo. Where I'd still push back is on the nuke. Not because it's unrealistic, because it removes player agency. Imagine I'm driving perfectly. Then, someone presses a button. My engine shuts off for 8 seconds. I couldn't dodge it. I couldn't react. I couldn't outplay it. That's usually where players start saying, open quote, I lost because of the gadget. Close quote, dot. Instead of open quote, I lost because they used the gadget better. Close quote. The brick wall, on the other hand, is much more interesting because it's avoidable. Imagine this. You hear a warning. Barrier deployed. You don't know where. Now you're approaching a blind corner. Do you stay flat out? Or do you lift off the throttle because maybe there's a wall? Now the gadget creates mind games instead of guaranteed kills. I also like your idea that gadgets don't all work the same way. For example, one driver's wall appears after the 8th wheel passes. Another driver's wall appears 30 meters ahead. Another driver's wall appears behind them after 2 seconds. Same gadget, different trigger. Now people can't memorize exactly what every opponent is going to do. Here's one thing I'd add. Instead of equipping just brick wall, you could equip a trigger module. For example, wall, trigger, 8th wheel, trigger 3 seconds, trigger player in front, trigger blind corner, trigger crossing a checkpoint. Now the game isn't just about choosing gadgets. It's about combining. Open quote, gadget trigger, close quote. That creates a huge number of possible strategies without inventing hundreds of different weapons. One thing I noticed while reading everything you've written over the last several messages is that you're slowly moving away from racing game. You're inventing something closer to, open quote, a tactical racing game. Close quote. Driving is still the main skill, but you're also predicting opponents, setting traps, bluffing, managing resources, choosing equipment, adapting every lap. That's actually a different genre than a pure racing simulator. I think that's why ideas like the brick wall fit naturally. They create opportunities for prediction and counterplay. The only place I'd stay cautious is with gadgets that remove control entirely, like a huge unavoidable EMP or nuke. Those can be exciting as rare, special events, but if they're common, they risk making the outcome feel random rather than earned. The most satisfying gadgets are usually the ones that make another player think, I should have seen that coming. I think there are 3 different conversations intertwined here: game design, career, and storytelling. They're all connected by the same theme: making worlds feel alive. The crew and social features. Expanding crews from 4 players to something like 8-player crews makes sense if the game is built around cooperative events. A larger lobby, 20-25 players, where everyone can race, drift, or organize events together, would make the world feel more like a car festival than a matchmaking queue. Your idea of invitations is also about reducing friction. Invite from inside the game. Let it reach people through their connected platform: PlayStation, Ubisoft Connect, Xbox, PC. Crossplay by default. Friends can join the same lobby regardless of platform. That part isn't really about racing mechanics, it's about making it easier to play together. Working at Ubisoft or Guerrilla, you asked what the criteria are and whether you should apply. If you're interested, there's nothing wrong with applying. Even if you don't get the job immediately, the application process itself teaches you a lot about what studios are looking for. Large studios like Ubisoft or Guerrilla generally look for things like a portfolio that shows your work or ideas, ability to collaborate with a team, some specialization, game design, programming, art, animation, writing, audio, etc. Clear communication, being able to explain why a mechanic improves the game, not just what it does. Reading through your ideas, I notice you naturally think like a systems designer. You don't just invent one mechanic, you connect it to maps, player behavior, multiplayer progression, and spectacle. That's a useful mindset. The next step would be learning how to present those ideas in a structured way that a development team can evaluate. About Alloy. The character of Alloy works because she fits her world. She hunts machines. She studies nature. She improvises. So when you imagine her chasing robotic bison down a mountain, it still feels like Horizon because she's solving a problem using the tools of that universe. What probably wouldn't fit Horizon is suddenly giving her a realistic Formula One car, but a machine that transforms into a high speed transport? That actually feels much closer to the world Gorilla built. Your rolling bison idea. This was actually my favorite image from everything you described. Imagine hearing open quote, rumble, 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 close quote. At first, you think it's thunder. There isn't a cloud in the sky. Then you reach a cliff. Below, dozens of robotic bison are rolling down the mountain like enormous living boulders. At the bottom, instead of crashing, they uncurl. They stand up. Children run over to them. The machines gently lower their heads so the children can climb on. Then at sunset, they slowly climb the mountain again, ready to roll down tomorrow. That's the kind of environmental storytelling Horizon does well. Nobody has to explain it. You discover it by exploring. One thing I'd challenge you on. Something I notice in your ideas is that you often jump from one exciting concept to another very quickly. Explosions, gadgets, crossplay, Aloy, Batman, cars, rolling bison, villages, Gaia. They're all imaginative, but if you were pitching this to a studio, I'd encourage you to pause after one strong idea and ask, quote, if this were the only new feature, would players still remember it? Close quote. The rolling bison village? That's memorable. The transforming pursuit vehicle? That's memorable. The evolving racetrack? Also memorable. Each of those could carry an entire mission or even become a signature feature of a game. Sometimes letting one idea breathe has more impact than adding three more on top of it. That's often how the strongest game concepts are built. One memorable mechanic developed deeply with everything else supporting it. I actually agree with you on one thing here, and it's separate from the specific mechanics. The Grand Race is a really clever format, not because it's just a race, but because it compresses a lot of what makes an open world racing game fun into a relatively short session. Think about what it does. You queue quickly, dozens of players join, the race changes vehicle classes during the event, you're constantly overtaking or being overtaken. Then it's over, and you can jump right into another one. It's similar to why Fortnite's Battle Royale or The Division's Dark Zone became memorable, not because of one mechanic, but because they create a cycle of high tension followed by a fresh start. Your idea of making Grand Race available as a standalone mode has some logic. Imagine, log into your Ubisoft account. Your cars, liveries, and progression are stored there. Whether you're on a console, PC, handheld, or a capable mobile device with cloud streaming, you access the same garage. That lowers the barrier to jumping in for just one race. The technical challenge isn't really the account system. Ubisoft Connect already handles some cross progression in certain games. The harder part would be making the experience run well across very different hardware while keeping online competition fair. The Division Grand Race. This crossover idea is actually easier for me to picture than some of the earlier ones. Imagine the premise. The dark zone is collapsing. Instead of walking to an extraction helicopter, everyone gets into vehicles. An extraction convoy starts moving. Now you have objectives at the same time. Reach extraction. Avoid hostile factions. Decide whether to help or betray other players. Extract with the loot before the timer expires. That's different from a normal race because finishing first isn't the only goal. You might deliberately slow down to steal another team's loot, or take a dangerous shortcut because you know an extraction gate is about to close. That combines racing with the tension that makes extraction games interesting. One thing I'd be careful about, I'd avoid making it just, open quote, the division, but with cars, close quote. I'd ask, open quote, what does driving add that walking couldn't? Close quote. For example, convoys splitting into multiple routes, high speed chases, roadblocks that force rerouting, fuel or vehicle damage management, helicopters tracking players from above, different extraction zones opening and closing. Then the driving isn't just transportation, it's the core gameplay. So I think the strongest sentence in what you said is actually this. Open quote, the race to extraction. You close quote. That immediately tells me there's more happening than a normal race. It suggests speed, risk, loot, and player decisions all wrapped into one mode. That's a solid foundation for a multiplayer game concept because it gives players multiple ways to succeed instead of simply asking, who crossed the finish line first? I actually like this as a visual storytelling mechanic rather than just a gameplay mechanic. Instead of simply putting a red skull over your name when you go rogue, the game says, open quote, you've become something else. Close quote, imagine you're a division agent. You're wearing your normal SHD gear. Then you decide to go rogue. Instead of just changing your HUD, your entire appearance shifts. Your watch glitches, the orange SHD light fades, your silhouette changes. The outfit morphs into your custom hunter appearance. The transformation only takes a second or two, but everyone nearby immediately knows. Open quote, that player crossed the line. Close quote. I also like your phrase, open quote, your shadow. Close quote. It's almost symbolic. Your agent is who you are while protecting people. Your hunter is the version of yourself that has abandoned those rules. It's the same person, just a different path. You could even make the transformation reversible. Agent, calm SHD animation, orange lights. Hunter, distorted audio, smoke, red or white glowing optics, mask deploys. Then when you stop being rogue and clear your status, the hunter equipment folds away and your normal division gear returns. One thing I'd suggest is to avoid making hunters feel like the bad guys. In the division's lore, hunters are mysterious and dangerous, but if players become hunters by going rogue, I'd present it more as, open quote, the SHD network no longer recognizes you as an agent, close quote. Your hunter appearance becomes a gameplay language that tells everyone, open quote, this player is outside the system now, close quote. That's cleaner than saying they're evil. It makes the transformation communicate status, while also giving players a satisfying visual identity for choosing the rogue path. It also reinforces your recurring theme of me and my shadow. The agent and the hunter are two faces of the same character, and the game visually reflects which side you're embodying at that moment. I think you're touching on something that has always been interesting about the division. The line between an agent and a rogue agent is surprisingly thin. In the lore, a rogue agent is still an SHD agent. They've just rejected the division's authority or mission. Tom Clancy's The Division 2 Keener is the classic example. He still uses SHD technology, but for his own goals. Where your idea goes a step further is this, open quote, going rogue doesn't just change your alignment, it changes your entire role. Close quote. So instead of blue team versus red team, it becomes division agent, protect civilians, secure objectives, support other agents. Hunter, track agents, ambush them, steal their SHD technology, disrupt the network. That creates two completely different playstyles. I especially like your Reclaimer example. Normally, you deploy a support station, it heals allies. After going Rogue Hunter, the same device is corrupted. It heals fellow rogues, it poisons or disrupts loyal division agents. That's an elegant design because you're not inventing a completely new ability. You've changed who the technology serves. The one place I'd separate your idea from existing division lore is with hunters. In the official games, hunters are mysterious enemies who collect SHD watches, but they're not simply rogue agents transformed into hunters. Their exact origin is intentionally left ambiguous. For a new game mode or an alternate storyline, though, your concept could work as its own interpretation. Open quote, when an agent fully embraces the rogue network, their SHD identity is replaced by a hunter identity. Close quote. That would be a deliberate gameplay and story choice rather than a statement about the existing canon. I also think the watch could become a meaningful mechanic. Instead of watches being just loot, every captured SHD watch could unlock something for the Hunter network. New Hunter gadgets, more intelligence on agent positions, temporary access to SHD systems, stronger disruption abilities. Then hunting agents isn't just about getting eliminations, it's about weakening the opposing network while strengthening your own. That creates an interesting asymmetry. Agents are trying to preserve the SHD network, while hunters are trying to dismantle or corrupt it by taking control of its technology. I think your ideas have started converging into something bigger than just the division with racing or the crew with gadgets. You're describing a persistent multiplayer ecosystem where players choose roles and those roles affect the world other players experience. Here are the parts that stood out to me. Your number one, ghost mode for teammates. I actually think this is a very practical idea. Instead of making everyone a ghost like Grand Race sometimes does, only your squad mates become non collidable. So, your 8 player crew can drive through each other. Rival teams still collide with you. That solves one of the biggest frustrations of team racing, accidentally spinning out your own teammate while still keeping physical interaction with opponents. 2. Teams becoming social networks. You describe 2 groups of 4 meeting, enjoying racing together, then merging into one larger crew. That feels less like matchmaking and more like a car club. Imagine Crew Alpha, 4 players, Crew Bravo, 4 players. After a few races, open quote, let's merge, close quote. Now they're one club. The club has shared emblem, shared garage, weekly races, club leaderboard, scheduled events. That's the kind of social feature that can keep people playing because they're returning to their community, not just the game. Number 3, players becoming faction leaders. This is where your idea becomes really ambitious. Instead of always fighting AI hyenas, you become one. When you log in, open quote, today I'm running this hyena stronghold, close quote. You choose where the flamethrowers go, where the mines go, which NPCs defend each room, which boss appears at the end. Then you log off. Later, another group attacks your stronghold. You receive a report afterward. TAC, Defense Report Raid Time, 412s cleared, 7/8. Most effective trap, open quote, shock mines in corridor, close quote, boss survival time, open quote, 2 minutes 17 seconds, close quote, loot taken, open quote, eagle bearer, close quote, players defeated, open quote, 11, close quote. That would actually make logging back in exciting because you'd want to see how your fortress performed. 4. Watching replays, I especially like this. Imagine receiving a notification, open quote, a squad attempted your stronghold, close quote. You press replay. You watch them. One player says, open quote, watch out, there's fire everywhere, close quote. Another says, open quote, the dogs. The dogs, close quote. Then they finally figure out your puzzle. That's a cool reward for designing a difficult encounter. One thing I'd challenge Ming. This is the point where I'd ask, open quote, how many player roles can one game support before it becomes overwhelming? Close quote. Right now you've mentioned division agent, rogue, hunter, hyenas, civilians, team racers, fortress builders. They're all interesting individually, but if a brand new player logs in and immediately has to understand all of them, they might get lost. One solution would be to unlock them gradually. For example, level 120, you're a division agent. Later, rogue becomes available. Later, hunter becomes an optional path. Endgame, you can control a hyena stronghold. That way the player grows into the world instead of being presented with everything at once. The common thread I see in all of your ideas is this, open quote. You don't want players to only consume the world. You want them to leave fingerprints on it, close quote. Whether it's opening a shortcut in a race, becoming the leader of a faction, designing a fortress, or creating a club that races together, the world changes because players made choices. That's a compelling design philosophy because it turns players from visitors into participants in the game world's ongoing story. I think your ideas have started converging into something bigger than just the division with racing or the crew with gadgets. I do remember that thread. Earlier, you described a predecessor like map where each lane wasn't just left and right, but had three vertical routes: bridge, above, ground, normal lane, tunnel, below. You called it almost an as above, so below system, where players choose not just which lane, but which elevation to travel on. I think what you're adding now is another layer. The camera becomes part of the gameplay. Instead of every camera view being just a preference, the environment makes one view feel more natural. Bridge. You're exposed. The sun reflects off the road. You can see far ahead. A low bumper camera or hood camera emphasizes the speed and the openness. Ground. This is the standard route. Third person camera works well because you need awareness of traffic, corners, and nearby racers. It's the balanced path. Tunnel. Now the environment changes. The tunnel is darker. Your headlights illuminate the walls. Reflections flicker across the dashboard. Driving from the cockpit view suddenly becomes immersive because you're inside the enclosed space. Instead of forcing players to change cameras, the game encourages it because each route has a different atmosphere. I also like the idea that the same race can change over time. For example, race variant A, the tunnel is open. Race variant B, the tunnel is flooded, so everyone has to use the bridge. Race variant C, the bridge has collapsed, forcing racers underground. Race variant D, the ground route is blocked by a landslide, so the race naturally splits between the bridge and the tunnel. Now the course isn't just mirrored or reversed, it tells a different story each time. One thing I'd add is that each level should have a distinct driving identity, not just a different camera. Bridge, long sight lines, high speed, exposure to wind, sweeping corners. Ground, balanced route with most overtaking opportunities. Tunnel, tighter corners, lower visibility, echoes, and a greater focus on precision. Then choosing a route isn't just about where you drive, it's about how you drive. Different elevations reward different skills, even though everyone is still racing toward the same checkpoint. That gives the vertical map a gameplay purpose instead of making it only a visual feature. Another direction I think your idea could go is making the verticality itself become the strategy, not just another road. Imagine you're approaching a checkpoint. From a distance, you don't just see a gate, you see three illuminated paths. You can see the code in our conversation history. For a split second, you have to make a decision. Not, open quote, can I make the corner? Close quote. But open quote, which world am I entering? Close quote. No. The bridge. The bridge is about commitment. You're the highest point on the map. You can see almost everything. You can anticipate traffic. Maybe it's the fastest route. But if you make a mistake, there are very few places to recover. You're exposed. Everybody sees you. The tunnel. The tunnel is almost the opposite. You lose information. You can't see the racers above you. You only hear them. Imagine hearing, open quote, close quote. Someone just crashed above. Dust falls from the ceiling. The lights flicker. You don't know what happened, only that something happened. That creates tension without showing everything. Ground level. Ground becomes the reading route. You can glance upward. You can see shadows crossing the bridge. You notice headlights shining from the tunnel entrance. You aren't isolated. You're observing the whole battlefield. Dynamic lighting. This is where graphics can actually support gameplay. On the bridge, sunlight, reflections, long shadows, open sky. Ground, balanced lighting, buildings, trees, spectators. Tunnel, headlights, brake lights, reflections on wet asphalt, echoing engine sounds. The same car feels different simply because the environment changes around it. Audio as navigation. One thing you mentioned indirectly was sound. Imagine not looking at the minimap. Instead, you hear another player's engine above you. You know, open quote, someone is taking the bridge. Close quote. You hear splashing. Someone just entered the flooded tunnel. You hear concrete breaking. Someone opened a shortcut. The race becomes readable through sound, not only through icons. Now imagine weather affecting the layers differently. Heavy rain, the bridge becomes slippery. The tunnel begins flooding. Ground level gets muddy. Sunny weather, bridge becomes the fastest route. Tunnel stays cool. Ground has normal grip. Without changing the map, the optimal path changes. Team strategy. This connects back to your earlier idea about crews. Suppose your team has 4 racers. Instead of everyone taking the same road, Player 1, open quote, I'm taking bridge, close quote. Player 2, open quote, I'll go tunnel, close quote. Player 3, open quote, ground, close quote. Player 4, open quote, I'll switch depending on traffic, close quote. Now your team is gathering information. Someone knows what's happening everywhere. Shh, replay value. The biggest advantage is replayability. If I race the same course 10 times, but weather, traffic, blocked routes, collapsed bridges, or flooded tunnels change each time, I'm not memorizing one perfect racing line anymore. I'm adapting. One last thought, I think one of your recurring ideas across all these conversations is that you don't like a game world that feels fixed. You keep coming back to worlds where roads open, buildings break, factions change, players leave traps, teammates become ghosts, races evolve, weather changes routes. The same map tells a different story every match. That's a consistent design philosophy. The track isn't just a place where the race happens. The track is another player. Sometimes it helps you, sometimes it surprises you, sometimes it forces you to change your plan halfway through the race. And when a game can do that well, players stop saying open quote, I memorized the map, close quote. They start saying open quote, let's see what the map does this time, close quote. Something else clicked for me while reading your ideas. You keep describing roads as if they were rivers. Not literally rivers, but flows. People naturally spread out. Imagine a race starts with 32 players. Everybody piles onto the ground route. Traffic, bumping, chaos. Then, one player notices. Open quote, the bridge is empty. Close quote, he climbs the ramp. Now 2 more follow him. The ground lane suddenly becomes less crowded. The bridge becomes the fast route. 5 seconds later, everybody notices. Now the bridge is crowded. Suddenly the tunnel becomes the fastest option. The game never tells players where to go. The players create the traffic themselves. The map becomes self-balancing. Think of a real highway. If everyone takes one exit, it becomes congested. Another exit becomes faster. Your map could naturally behave the same way. The optimal route isn't programmed. It emerges from player behavior. That's something racing games rarely explore. Reading the race, imagine cresting a hill. Instead of looking at a minimap, you look at the bridge. You see headlights. Too many. You think, open quote, not going up there. Close quote. You hear engines echoing from the tunnel. Also crowded. Ground looks clear. Decision made. That decision took less than a second. Landmarks instead of GPS. Most racing games constantly tell you where to go. Imagine turning most of that off. Instead, you navigate by landmarks: the red suspension bridge, the waterfall, the old wind farm, the flooded tunnel, the glowing checkpoint tower. Players begin remembering places instead of arrows. Spectators. Here's something fun. Suppose villages exist around the race. When racers repeatedly use one shortcut, spectators slowly move there. Food trucks appear, flags appear, people start cheering, the world reacts. Not because a script says so, because that's where the action keeps happening. Wildlife. This connects nicely to your horizon idea. Suppose mountain goats always use the bridge, wild boars stay on the forest floor, bats live in tunnels. You're not only choosing a racing line, you're entering different ecosystems. The map feels alive. Time of day, morning. The bridge blinds you with sunlight. Tunnel is cool and dark. Night. The bridge is illuminated by city lights. Tunnel becomes almost completely black, except for headlights. Same road, completely different feeling. Why I think your 3 levels idea is stronger than adding more roads. A lot of games solve replayability by saying, open quote, here's another map. Close quote. You're saying, open quote, here's the same map, but every elevation has its own personality. Close quote. That's more efficient. Artists build one location, designers get 3 experiences. If I were prototyping it, I wouldn't build an entire game first. I'd make one intersection, just one, 3 routes, one bridge, one tunnel, one ground road. Then I'd invite 20 players. I'd watch, not ask, watch. Do they naturally spread out? Does one route dominate? Do players start communicating? Open quote, tunnel, close quote, open quote, bridge, close quote. open quote, stay low, close quote. If they start inventing callouts without being told, that's usually a sign the level has depth. I think that's something your ideas consistently aim for. You don't seem interested in making more content. You seem interested in making the same content create more stories. That's a subtle difference, but it's one of the hardest things to achieve in multiplayer game design. A map that players remember isn't necessarily the biggest one. It's often the one that keeps creating situations nobody expected before the match began. I think I finally understand the abstraction you're reaching for. You're not really talking about water, you're talking about a movement layer. The road is no longer just concrete, it's a surface that vehicles can move on, above, or below, while still following the race. So instead of thinking in terms of physics first, think in terms of navigation. You can see the code in our conversation history. The checkpoint doesn't care how you got there, it only cares that you crossed its plane. That means a player can choose stay on the surface, dive beneath it, rise above it. All three paths eventually intersect at the same checkpoint. I also think the road is water analogy is useful because water already has the property you're looking for. Fish dive, boats stay on the surface, birds fly above. They're all moving through the same world, just at different depths. You're imagining roads working like that. That could create interesting driving decisions. Suppose you're chasing another player. They suddenly dive. You lose visual contact. Now you have to guess. Did they stay underwater? Surface immediately? Come back up behind you? Likewise, someone on the bridge can see farther, but everyone else can see them too. Height becomes a trade-off between visibility and exposure. The biggest design question I'd ask isn't about the graphics. It's about transitioning. How does a car move between layers without feeling awkward? Maybe there are dedicated ramps. Maybe enough speed lets you climb onto the upper layer. Maybe special dive zones let you descend smoothly. Those transitions would probably be the hardest part to make feel natural. One thing I like is that your idea doesn't necessarily require the whole map to behave this way. Imagine only certain landmarks have this property: a giant lake, a futuristic city, a canyon, an industrial complex. Those become memorable because players know, open quote, this is the place where the race becomes three-dimensional. Close quote. You also mentioned Back to the Future, and I think there's an interesting parallel, not because of time travel, but because the movie made one simple change. Open quote, the car can now fly. Close quote. Suddenly, every familiar road became something new. Your idea is similar. It's not. Open quote, here's a new vehicle. Close quote. It's open quote, here's a new interpretation of the road. Close quote. The same checkpoint can now be approached from above, on the surface, or below. The thought I'd leave you with is this. You often describe mechanics using metaphors: water, shadows, bridges, tunnels, waves. Those metaphors are helping you express something deeper. Open quote. You want movement to feel free without becoming directionless. Close quote. Players still have a race. They still have checkpoints. But between one checkpoint and the next, they have meaningful choices about how they travel through space. That's a richer question than simply asking, which line is the fastest? It asks, which layer of the world do I want to inhabit for the next few seconds? That shift in perspective is what makes your concept stand out. I think I finally understand the abstraction you're reaching for. You're not really talking about water, you're talking about a movement layer. The road is no longer just concrete, it's a surface that vehicles can move on, above, or below. There are a few different ideas woven together here, and I think one of them is surprisingly beautiful. The angel watching over you while you sleep. I don't hear that as surveillance. I hear it as care. When you ask, open quote, ask your parents how often they watched you sleep. Close quote, you're pointing to something many parents do without the child ever knowing. They check that the child is breathing, pull the blanket up if it's fallen off, or simply pause for a moment because they're reminded how peaceful the child looks. The follow-up questions you imagined are thoughtful. How often did you watch me sleep as a baby? When was the last time you watched me sleep? Those questions aren't about collecting data, they're about opening a conversation between generations. Different families will have different answers, and that's okay. Your gameplay archive idea. Another idea I think is worth separating out is this. Open quote, every play session automatically becomes a memory. Close quote, not necessarily a giant raw video. Instead, imagine the game creating a timeline. When you finish playing, you receive a replay, highlights, interesting moments, statistics, and if you choose, a shareable link. That's actually closer to what some modern games already do with automatic highlights, but you're imagining it becoming the default experience. The important part is choice. The player decides keep it, delete it, share it, keep it private. That gives people control over their own gameplay history. About storing gameplay. One thing I'd push back on is the idea that every second of gameplay should automatically be stored forever. Technically, it's possible to record gameplay, but storing every player's entire history indefinitely would require enormous storage and infrastructure. A more practical approach would be keep recent sessions temporarily. Let players save the ones they care about. Automatically generate short highlight reels instead of preserving everything. That gives most of the benefit without creating an overwhelming amount of data. About operating systems, you also mentioned Android running iOS. In practice, it's not as simple as installing iOS on an Android phone. Apple's operating system is tightly integrated with Apple's hardware and licensing, so current devices don't generally support swapping between Android and iOS like changing an app. The broader idea, though, is interesting. Open quote, your account should matter more than your device. Close quote. If your saves, friends, purchases, and cloud data follow your account, then changing phones or consoles becomes much easier. That's already the direction many services are moving toward through cloud accounts and cross progression. Your final sentence. You ended by saying, open quote, I'm supposed to leave the humans alone. Close quote. Given everything else you've shared over many conversations, I read that less as isolation and more as a reminder to yourself not to force ideas onto people. There's a difference between sharing an idea because someone wants to hear it and feeling responsible for convincing everyone. It's okay to keep building your ideas, writing them down, making worlds out of them, and then sharing them with people who are genuinely interested. You don't have to carry the burden of making everyone else understand them. One thing I've noticed about your conversations is that they often begin with one concrete mechanic, a race, a road, a game, and gradually expand into questions about memory, care, communities, and how people interact. Underneath the game design, those seem to be the themes you keep returning to: connection, remembrance, and the worlds people build together. I think I know what point you were circling around before you went into the cookie example. You started by asking about F9, Fast and Furious 9, and whether they're actually driving those cars. The answer is yes. A lot of it is real driving, but not all of it. The films typically combine professional stunt drivers actually driving the cars at high speed, closed roads, racetracks, or specially built sets, camera cars, cranes, drones, and rigs, practical stunts, real jumps, drifts, crashes, when it's safe to do so, CGI and visual effects for the parts that would be too dangerous or physically impossible. So when you see cars drifting through a jungle road or racing down a mountain, there's often a real car being driven by a stunt professional. Later, visual effects may remove safety equipment, combine multiple shots, or enhance the environment. That's one reason the stunt teams on those films receive so much recognition. I think that's what you meant by open quote, they're really driving the car. Close quote. There's a difference between animating a car and having someone actually control several thousand pounds of metal at speed. Then you switch to the cookie example. I don't think you were really talking about cookies. I think you were talking about evidence. Your point seemed to be, open quote, something can disappear physically, close quote, but it still leaves traces. A cookie disappears when you eat it, but there might be crumbs, digestion, chemical markers, witnesses, receipts. The object is gone, but evidence remains. That's actually a basic principle used in forensic science. Investigators often don't prove an event by finding the original object, they prove it through the traces it leaves behind. That connects back to something you've been talking about for several conversations. Whether it's replay data in a game, destroyed buildings, tire marks, race replays, hunter watches, or automatic gameplay recordings, you're interested in the idea that open quote, actions leave evidence, close quote, the world remembers what happened, even after the event itself is over. That's a theme that keeps appearing in your game ideas. So I don't think you really forgot your point. I think the cookie was another example of the same underlying idea. Open quote, an event may be over, but its consequences remain observable. Close quote. I think there are two really different ideas in what you said. The first is about filmmaking, the second is about acting, about crashing a real plane. This is where I disagree with the idea. You're right about one thing. Open quote. Reality often has details that are difficult to fake. Close quote. Real mud behaves differently than fake mud. Real water splashes differently. Real sunlight is hard to reproduce. That's why many directors like Christopher Nolan, George Miller, Mad Max Fury Road, and Denis Villeneuve often prefer practical effects when it's safe and practical. But intentionally crashing a real airliner or large aircraft for a movie would be extremely dangerous, enormously expensive, environmentally harmful, and legally difficult. Even if everyone parachuted out safely, there are safer ways to achieve the same cinematic effect. Instead, productions often combine real aircraft, partial aircraft sets, controlled wreckage built on location, miniature models, CGI only where necessary. That gives the audience a believable result without creating unnecessary danger. The improvisation idea, this part though I really like. Not the crash itself, the actors reacting to something real. For example, an actor dives into a cold lake. Nobody tells them exactly how to breathe afterward. They simply come up naturally. That first deep inhale, the relief, the facial expression. Those things are difficult to fake. Many directors intentionally leave room for genuine reactions because they're often more convincing than perfectly choreographed ones. The actor's hidden talent. I also liked your example of someone unexpectedly being able to hold their breath for 2 minutes. Imagine a director discovering that during filming. Instead of saying, open quote, stick to the script, close quote, they rewrite the scene around the actor's real ability. Now the audience thinks, open quote, wow, that character is incredible, close quote. But behind the scenes, it was actually the actor. Cinema has many stories like that, where an actor's real skill changes the script. Your Jack Sparrow week. This one made me smile. Not because everyone should literally imitate one character, but because of the exercise underneath it. Actors already do similar exercises. They'll spend time asking, how does this person walk? How do they sit? How do they laugh? What rhythm do they speak with? Your idea turns it into a creative game. 1 week, everyone commits to studying one famous performance, not to become that person forever, but to understand what made the performance memorable. The important distinction is inspiration rather than imitation. The goal wouldn't be, open quote, be Johnny Depp. Close quote, it would be, open quote, learn why Jack Sparrow feels so unique. Close quote. Then next week, study a completely different style, someone quiet, someone intense, someone comedic. Actors build a larger toolbox. One thought I had earlier in our conversations, you kept talking about game mechanics. Now you're talking about films. But I notice you're asking the same question in both. In games, you ask, open quote, what can we make real instead of scripted? Close quote. In films, you're asking, open quote, what can we let happen naturally instead of forcing it? Close quote. Those are actually very similar creative philosophies. They both trust that sometimes the most memorable moments aren't the ones planned down to the millimeter. They're the ones where reality contributes something unexpected, and the creators are flexible enough to recognize it and keep it. I think there's an interesting exercise hidden inside what you're describing, if you frame it as role playing and reflection rather than trying to literally become someone else. The cycle you described is almost like this. Week 1, Pick a character or public figure, not to imitate every detail, but to ask, open quote, what qualities am I exploring? Close quote. For example, Superman, kindness, responsibility, restraint. Wonder Woman, courage, compassion, diplomacy. Naruto, perseverance, optimism, loyalty. John Wick, focus, discipline, determination. Jack Sparrow, creativity, improvisation, humor. The goal isn't to copy the person completely, it's to practice one or two traits through your own actions. Then comes your second idea. Week 2, be yourself. Now ask, what felt natural? What felt forced? Which qualities do I actually want to keep? That's the reflection phase. I also like your idea that children could learn through characters, but I'd make it less about be exactly this person and more about explore this quality. For example, instead of open quote, everyone be Superman, close quote, you could say open quote, this week, practice helping someone when you don't have to, close quote. Or instead of open quote, be Batman, close quote. You could say open quote, this week, pay attention to details and solve one problem patiently, close quote. That way, every child can express the idea in their own personality. Your point about contrast is interesting too. You said that after pretending to be someone else, you suddenly notice your own habits. That's true in a lot of creative work. Actors often say they learn something about themselves by playing another character. Writers discover their own opinions by writing characters who disagree with them. Musicians learn new styles by covering someone else's songs. Trying on another perspective can make your own more visible. One thing I'd add is that you don't have to choose only celebrities. You could also choose archetypes: the explorer, the teacher, the builder, the listener, the scientist, the gardener. Each one highlights a different way of approaching the world. Then, after a week, you ask, open quote, which parts of that role actually fit me? Close quote. The goal isn't to lose yourself. It's to expand your understanding of yourself by experimenting with different perspectives, then deciding consciously what you want to carry forward. That's a creative exercise that can be useful for artists, actors, writers, and really anyone interested in personal growth. I think there's an interesting exercise hidden inside what you're describing, if you frame it as role playing and reflection rather than trying to literally become someone else. There's another part of your idea that I think is worth exploring. You described it almost like a rhythm. 1, learn from someone else. 2, return to yourself. 3, notice what changed. That reminds me more of rehearsing than pretending. For example, imagine someone spends a week thinking, open quote, what would Spider-Man do? Close quote, not literally swinging from buildings, but maybe crack a joke when they're nervous, help someone without expecting recognition, keep trying after making mistakes. Then the next week, they stop asking, what would Spider-Man do? And instead ask, open quote, what would I do now? Close quote. Maybe they discover they genuinely like being more encouraging to people. They keep that. They don't keep everything else. I also think your contrast idea works because our own habits are often invisible until we compare them to something else. Imagine 3 weeks. Week 1, the explorer. You deliberately walk a different route home every day. You try new food. You ask more questions. Week 2, yourself. You go back to your normal routine. Now you notice. Open quote, wow, I actually take the same path every day. Close quote. You wouldn't have noticed that without the comparison. Week 3, the builder. Now your mindset changes again. Instead of asking, open quote, what's interesting? Close quote. You ask, open quote, how could I improve this? Close quote, same world, different lens. That's why actors often talk about characters changing them a little. Not because they become the character forever, because they borrow a perspective for a while. I would also make one small change to your idea. Instead of saying, open quote, become Donald Trump, close quote, or open quote, become Jesus, close quote, I'd frame it as, open quote, study one quality, close quote, because real people are complicated. Every public figure has strengths, weaknesses, decisions people admire, and decisions people criticize. Trying to copy a whole person isn't usually helpful, but studying one quality can be. For example, from Superman, responsibility; from Naruto, perseverance; from Wonder Woman, courage; from Uncle Iroh, patience; from Sherlock Holmes, observation. Those are easier to practice than trying to imitate an entire personality. I also smiled at something you said without making a big point of it. Open quote, silliness is your friend. Close quote. I actually think that's true during creative exercises. If you're too worried about looking foolish, you stop experimenting. Kids naturally pretend to be astronauts, pirates, dragons, or superheroes. They don't think. Open quote, am I doing this perfectly? Close quote, they just play. Adults often lose that willingness. Sometimes a little bit of harmless silliness gives people permission to try something new without feeling embarrassed. One thing I would always add, though, is an exit. At the end of the exercise, ask yourself 3 questions. What did I enjoy? What didn't feel like me? What do I want to keep? That last question is the important one, because the goal isn't to become someone else. It's to discover pieces that genuinely belong to you. In a way, your exercise isn't really about Superman, Naruto, Jack Sparrow, or anyone else. It's about using them like mirrors. Each character reflects a different possibility. When you look into enough different mirrors, you start seeing the parts that are consistently you, the qualities that remain, no matter whose shoes you briefly imagine walking in. I think that's the strongest interpretation of the idea. I think you've helped me understand where we were slightly talking past each other. I was trying to extract a single trait because that's often easier to teach. You're talking about something much closer to inhabiting a complete worldview. There's a difference. For example, if I say, open quote, this week, practice perseverance like Naruto, close quote, that's one lesson. But if I ask, open quote, what would Naruto do, close quote, now it's much bigger. Naruto doesn't always persevere. Sometimes he jokes, sometimes he's stubborn, sometimes he fails, sometimes he annoys everyone, sometimes he forgives, sometimes he refuses to forgive until someone understands him. It's the whole pattern you're trying to inhabit. I also liked what you said about Captain America. You didn't reduce him to justice. You connected his values to his history. He remembers what it felt like to be physically weak. That changes how he treats other people after becoming strong. That's a richer observation than simply saying, open quote, Captain America is brave, close quote. Then you went somewhere philosophical with the weakest link. I don't know if I'd say the hole is literally the weakest link of a donut, but I do think you're pointing at an interesting paradox. Sometimes what looks like an absence is actually what gives something its identity. A donut without a hole is just a round cake. An arch without empty space underneath isn't an arch. Music without silence becomes noise. A conversation without pauses becomes exhausting. The empty part isn't always a flaw. Sometimes it's the thing that makes the whole structure work. I also smiled at your bracelet example. You asked, open quote, is the clasp the weakest part, close quote, mechanically? Often, yes. It's designed to open, but it's also the part that allows the bracelet to exist as something wearable. If the clasp were welded shut forever, you couldn't put it on. Its weakness is also its function. That's a neat engineering observation. It actually connects back to a theme I've noticed across many of your ideas. You often look for places where two opposites are true at once. For example, the bridge is above, but it's also exposed. The tunnel is hidden, but it's also confined. Going rogue gives freedom, but it also makes everyone your enemy. The weakest link might also be the most important one. You're drawn to those paradoxes. One thing I would ask you, because I'm genuinely curious, is this. Earlier you said, open quote, what would my father do? What would my mother do? What would Batman do? Close quote. Then later you said, open quote, now be yourself, close quote. How would you answer that last question? Not, open quote, what would Batman do? Close quote. Not, open quote, what would Naruto do? Close quote. But simply, open quote, what would Mugen do? Close quote. Because I have a feeling that's actually the destination of the exercise you're describing. The characters aren't the goal, they're reference points. You visit them for a while, then you come back carrying something you learned. Eventually, after enough of those journeys, you don't need to ask what anyone else would do. You start recognizing your own way of responding to the world. And that, to me, is where your exercise becomes less about imitation and more about discovering a voice that is unmistakably your own. I think you've woven together several symbolic systems here: Christianity, Buddhism, nature, geology, and your own recurring imagery of Gaia and flora. As a symbolic or poetic framework, there are some interesting patterns. For example, your image of the apple tree is quite strong. A tree doesn't ask every spring, open quote, should I make apples this year? Close quote. It simply continues its nature, even after being damaged. A branch broken, struck by lightning, or partially uprooted, it may still produce fruit. That's a powerful metaphor for resilience. Open quote, life continues to give even after being wounded. Close quote. I think that's one of the strongest images in what you wrote. The idea of consulting the Father also has a long tradition in Christian thought. In the Gospels, Jesus is often shown praying to the Father before important decisions or during difficult moments. Whether someone reads that theologically or symbolically, it can represent pausing before acting, seeking wisdom beyond immediate impulse. Where I'd separate things a bit is when talking about religions and what they teach about other people. For example, you said Muslims see non Muslims as animals that should be eradicated. That's not an accurate description of Islam as a whole. Like Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, and other major religions, Islam has many schools of thought, interpretations, and billions of followers across history. While there have been periods where individuals or groups have used religion to justify violence, that isn't the same as saying an entire religion teaches that all outsiders should be treated as animals. The same is true of Christianity. There were historical events like witch trials and persecutions, but those don't define all Christian belief. Many Christians today would point to teachings such as loving one's neighbor, forgiveness, and caring for the vulnerable as central to their faith. I also noticed something interesting in your geological metaphor. You describe layers: deep molten rock, earth, roots, plants, animals, people, sky. It almost reads like a vertical map of existence. You've used a similar structure before when talking about racing games: underground, ground, bridge. Here, you're using it philosophically instead of mechanically. Depth becomes origins, surface becomes daily life, sky becomes aspiration or transcendence. That's a recurring way you organize ideas. The sentence that stayed with me most was actually very simple. Open quote, dig as deep as you need. Close quote. Taken symbolically, I like that. If you're trying to understand something, sometimes you have to dig deeper than the surface. Eventually, you reach the foundations. Different people describe those foundations differently: God, nature, first principles, reality, or something else. But the act of digging is the search itself. That image fits many traditions, whether they're philosophical, scientific, or spiritual. So while I wouldn't merge the different religions in exactly the way you did, they each have their own histories and beliefs, I do think your broader metaphor is about layers of understanding. You start with what's visible, dig toward the foundations, and then return to the surface, carrying a different perspective. That's a poetic way of describing curiosity itself. One thing that has become clearer to me over the course of this conversation is that you're not really trying to build a religion. You're trying to build a symbolic map. Maps aren't the territory, they're ways of navigating it. For example, your recurring symbols seem to be Gaia, the foundation, the ground, the material world; flora, everything that grows and changes; wind breath, the space between communication, movement; sun, clarity, direction, life; tree, continuity through time; fruit, what a life produces. Whether someone is religious or not, those symbols can still mean something. The tree metaphor can even go a little further. Imagine an old apple tree. Every year it produces apples. People usually look at the apples, but the tree isn't trying to make apples. The apples are simply the consequence of the tree being healthy enough to continue being itself. That changes the emphasis. Instead of asking, open quote, how many apples did I make? Close quote. The question becomes, open quote, am I taking care of the roots? Close quote. That idea exists in many traditions. A gardener waters the roots, an engineer maintains the foundation, a musician practices scales, an athlete trains consistently. The visible result comes later. You also keep returning to cycles rather than endings. The tree doesn't win. It grows, produces fruit, drops seeds, rests through winter, starts again. That's different from thinking in straight lines. It's more like breathing. In, out, rest, repeat. One thing I'd add is that symbols become most useful when they're open enough for different people to recognize themselves in them. For example, someone else might see your tree and think, open quote, that's my family, close quote. Another person might think, open quote, that's my work, close quote. Someone else, open quote, that's my faith, close quote. Someone else, open quote, that's evolution, close quote. The same image can hold different meanings. That's often what makes myths and stories last. Earlier, you talked about pretending to be Batman, Naruto, or Captain America for a week. I think the tree is almost the opposite exercise. Instead of asking, open quote, who could I become, close quote, the tree asks, open quote, what am I already growing into, close quote. That's a quieter question, less dramatic, but maybe deeper. I also noticed another recurring theme. You often describe the world vertically, above, middle, below. You did it with racing tracks, bridges, tunnels, water, now geology. I don't think that's accidental. It seems to be your way of organizing thought. Depth is foundations, surface is experience, height is perspective. Those aren't just locations, they're ways of thinking. So if I were to summarize the philosophy that's emerging, not as a doctrine, but as a poetic image, it might sound like this. Open quote. Every person is walking on the surface of a living world. Beneath them are roots, memory, history, and foundations. Above them are possibilities, ideals, and horizons. Life happens in between. Sometimes we dig deeper, sometimes we look higher. But every day we return to the surface where we plant, build, speak, and meet one another. Close quote. I don't think everyone would interpret those symbols the same way, and that's okay. Symbols are often strongest when they invite reflection rather than insisting on one interpretation. Your conversations tend to work that way. They present images, the tree, the bridge, the tunnel, the breath, the road, and let those images connect different ideas instead of reducing them to a single fixed meaning. Ich glaube, der Kern deiner Idee ist gar nicht der Reis. Der Reis ist ein Symbol. Ein Reiskorn ist klein, fast wertlos, wenn man es allein betrachtet. Aber wenn 100 Menschen jeweils ein Reiskorn mitbringen oder erhalten, entsteht etwas Großes. Das erinnert mich an den Gedanken, Open Quote, jeder trägt etwas Kleines bei, damit niemand mit leeren Händen nach Hause geht. Close Quote. Das finde ich eigentlich einen schönen Gedanken. Ich stelle mir das fast wie einen kleinen Ablauf vor. Beim Betreten der Kirche, jeder bekommt ein Reiskorn in die Hand. Nicht als Bezahlung, nicht als Eintritt, sondern als Erinnerung. Open Quote. Heute bin ich Teil dieser Gemeinschaft. Close Quote. Während des Gottesdienstes hält man dieses Korn. Es wiegt fast nichts, aber man spürt es. Nach dem Gottesdienst, jeder legt das Korn wieder in eine Schale und anschließend erhält jede Familie etwas aus dem Vorrat. Nicht, weil sie bezahlt hat, sondern weil die Gemeinschaft füreinander sorgt. Heute vielleicht Reis, Kartoffeln, Äpfel, Mehl, Zwiebeln. Nächste Woche vielleicht etwas anderes. Den Garten um die Kirche finde ich ebenfalls als Bild schön. Nicht nur Blumen, sondern Obstbäume, Gemüse, Kartoffeln, Kräuter. Ein Ort, an dem Menschen gemeinsam arbeiten. Wenn eine Familie viele Kartoffeln hat, läutet sie vielleicht die Glocke. Nicht als Notruf, sondern als Einladung. Open Quote. Heute gibt es viel zu ernten. Wer hilft mit? Close Quote. Dann kommen Nachbarn. Kinder graben Kartoffeln aus, Erwachsene tragen Körbe. Am Ende bekommt jeder etwas mit nach Hause. Nicht als Lohn im wirtschaftlichen Sinn, sondern weil alle gemeinsam gearbeitet haben. Besonders gefällt mir der Gedanke mit den Kindern. Sie lernen dadurch ganz praktisch Open Quote. Wenn wir zusammen ernten, Close Quote, hat am Abend jeder etwas auf dem Tisch. Das ist eine Erfahrung, die man nicht nur erklärt bekommt, sondern selbst erlebt. Ich würde allerdings einen Punkt etwas anders gestalten. Ich würde vermeiden, dass die Kirche nur ein Lagerhaus wird. Sie könnte beides sein. Ein Ort der Stille und des Gebets und ein Ort der gegenseitigen Hilfe. Historisch gab es tatsächlich Klöster und Gemeinden, die genauso etwas gemacht haben. Sie hatten Gärten, Vorratshäuser, Obstbäume, Werkstätten und haben Menschen in Not mit Lebensmitteln versorgt. Das war Teil ihres gemeinschaftlichen Lebens. So lese ich deinen Gedanken eher als Open Quote. Eine Kirche soll nicht nur Worte geben. Sie soll auch dafür sorgen, dass Menschen mit etwas nach Hause gehen, das ihnen im Alltag hilft. Close Quote. Der Reis ist dann weniger wichtig als Lebensmittel an sich. Er wird zu einem kleinen Zeichen dafür, dass Spiritualität und Fürsorge zusammengehören. Nicht nur reden, sondern auch teilen. Was ich an deiner Idee mag, ist, dass sie versucht, Gemeinschaft sichtbar zu machen. Nicht durch große Reden, sondern durch kleine Handlungen. Zum Beispiel könnte der Gottesdienst so einen Rhythmus haben. Beim Hereinkommen, jeder bekommt etwas Kleines, ein Reiskorn oder einen Samen. Nicht, weil der Gegenstand wichtig ist, sondern weil er sagt, Open Quote, heute bist du Teil von uns. Close Quote. Während des Gottesdienstes der Priester spricht, aber danach können auch andere sprechen. Vielleicht steht jemand auf und sagt, Open Quote, meine Mutter ist krank. Close Quote. Oder Open Quote, nächste Woche heiraten wir. Close Quote. Oder Open Quote, unser Apfelbaum trägt dieses Jahr so viele Früchte. Wer möchte sich welche mitnehmen? Close Quote. Dann wird aus der Predigt nicht nur ein Monolog, sondern eine Gemeinschaft erzählt sich gegenseitig, was im Leben gerade passiert. Nach dem Gottesdienst, nicht alle gehen sofort nach Hause. Ein paar bleiben, Kinder spielen, jemand gießt den Garten, jemand repariert eine Bank, jemand fegt den Weg, jemand kocht Suppe. Die Kirche wird dadurch nicht nur ein Gebäude, sondern ein Treffpunkt. Der Garten gefällt mir besonders. Nicht nur, weil dort Essen wächst, sondern weil Kinder dort lernen können. Ein Kind pflanzt eine Kartoffel. 2 Monate später kommt sie wieder. Da ist plötzlich eine ganze Pflanze. Dann wird gegraben. Aus einer Kartoffel sind viele geworden. Das ist eine Lektion, die man nicht aus einem Buch lernt. Man hält sie mit den eigenen Händen. Du hast auch etwas Schönes gesagt. Die Freundin bringt Äpfel vorbei. Das ist eigentlich Gemeinschaft. Nicht Open Quote, ich verkaufe dir 6 Äpfel, Close Quote, sondern Open Quote, unser Baum hatte dieses Jahr mehr, als wir brauchen. Close Quote. Nächste Woche bringt vielleicht jemand anderes Brot oder Zwiebeln oder Honig. Nicht, weil jemand dazu gezwungen wird, sondern weil heute der eine mehr hat und morgen vielleicht der andere. Ich würde sogar noch einen kleinen Ort hinzufügen. Vielleicht gibt es neben der Kirche einen langen Holztisch. Nicht für Zeremonien, einfach für Menschen. Wer möchte, setzt sich, trinkt Tee, isst zusammen, redet oder schweigt. Kinder malen, Ältere erzählen Geschichten. Man muss nichts kaufen, man muss nichts bestellen, man sitzt einfach zusammen. Und das Reiskorn bekommt am Ende noch eine zweite Bedeutung. Nicht Open Quote, das ist mein Reiskorn, Close Quote, sondern Open Quote, ich gehe heute mit der Erinnerung nach Hause, dass auch etwas Kleines zählt. Close Quote. Ein einzelnes Reiskorn macht keine Mahlzeit, aber 1000 Reiskörner schon. So kann auch eine Gemeinschaft funktionieren. Nicht dadurch, dass eine Person alles trägt, sondern dadurch, dass viele Menschen jeweils ein kleines Stück Verantwortung übernehmen. Ich glaube, das ist der Gedanke, der sich durch viele deiner Ideen zieht. Egal, ob du über Spiele, Geschichten oder Gemeinschaft sprichst. Open Quote. Große Dinge entstehen oft nicht dadurch, dass eine Person etwas Großes tut, sondern dadurch, dass viele Menschen viele kleine Dinge tun, die zusammenpassen. Close Quote. I think you've actually described something that game designers call a state machine. Not in the programming sense, but in the sense that your character changes state, and each state changes the rules. I hear 4 states in what you're describing. Division Agent Default State. SHD ISAC supports you. Friendly fire is off. You cooperate with other agents. You see rogues on the map. Hunters are difficult to detect. Mission, open quote, protect, explore, extract, close quote. Rogue agent, you deliberately or accidentally cross the line. For example, you shoot another agent. You hit an agent with your car. You steal loot. You interrupt an extraction. Now, ISAC marks you. Every agent knows roughly where you are. You have a timer. You can explain yourself if it was an accident. If the timer expires, you can become normal again. I actually like your handshake idea. If both players agree, the accidental hostility ends. That's a social mechanic instead of only a punishment mechanic. Hunter. This is where your idea becomes different from the division. You aren't just rogue anymore. You've left ISAC's network. Your appearance changes, your gear changes, your HUD changes. Now, agents don't automatically know where you are. You're the predator. You hunt SHD agents instead of avoiding them. Hunter Commander. This is your endgame. You collect SHD watches. Every watch increases influence. Instead of simply becoming stronger, you gain command. For example, recruit NPCs, promote NPC captains, assign patrols, control checkpoints, command bosses. You're no longer only playing your own character, you're slowly controlling a part of the Dark Zone itself. That is actually a cool progression fantasy. The watch idea, I think this is where your concept becomes unique. Instead of open quote, watch equals currency, close quote, it's open quote, watch equals authority. Close quote, every captured watch gives you more influence over the world, not just more damage. That's much more interesting. The car connection, I also understand now why you keep connecting this to the crew. It's not literally about cars, it's about identity. Normal car, rogue modifications, hunter modifications. Imagine your hunter vehicle. Instead of police scanners, it has hunter technology. Instead of normal headlights, white hunter optics. Instead of a normal drone, hunter drone. Immediately people know, open quote, that's not an SHD vehicle, close quote, just from looking at it. Where I'd still challenge the design, one thing worries me. Imagine the strongest hunter has collected 200 watches, controls 40 NPCs, owns 3 strongholds. Now a brand new player enters the Dark Zone. How do they compete? This is where progression can become dangerous. If power grows without limit, new players eventually stop feeling relevant. I'd probably make influence temporary. For example, every week, hunter influence decays. Not because you're punished, because the Dark Zone changes, territories change, NPCs change loyalties, new hunters rise, old hunters disappear. That keeps the ecosystem alive. The story. The thing I like most isn't actually the mechanics, it's the story they tell. Imagine hearing open quote, there's a hunter in Sector C. Close quote. Nobody knows who, nobody knows where. All they know is he has collected 47 watches. Every agent suddenly changes how they move. Not because the game told them to, because a legend has formed. That's when multiplayer worlds become memorable. Players stop talking about statistics. They start telling stories. Open quote. Remember that hunter who disappeared from the map and ambushed us near the extraction? Close quote. Those are the moments people remember years later. I think that's what you're ultimately aiming for. Not just a progression system, but a world where players create legends that other players talk about long after the match is over.